Now, after we saw how people make decisions and how people interact with each another, now we go to how the economy as whole works. Principle 8. A country's standard of living depends on its ability to produce goods and services. How is that? The differences in living standards around the world are staggering. In 1997, the average American had an income of about $29,000. In the same year, the average Mexican earned 8,000 only, and the average of a Nigerian earned $900. Not surprisingly, this large variation in average income is reflected in various measures of the quality of life citizens of high-income countries such as America, Canada, Spain, Netherlands, and so on, have more TV sets, more cars, better nutrition, better health care, and longer life expectancy than citizens of low-income countries, which are basically the countries of sub-Saharan countries such as Nigeria, Mozambique, and basically all the African countries. Okay, let's keep on. What explains these large differences is living standards among countries over time. The answer is surprisingly simple. Almost all variations in living standards is attributed to differences in countries' productivity. That is, the amount of goods and services produced from each hour of a worker's time. In nations where workers can produce a large quantity of goods and services per unit of time, most people enjoy a high standard of living. In nations where workers are less productive, most people must endure a more meager existence. Similarly, the growth rate of a nation's productivity determines the growth rate of its average income. So there is a positive relationship between productivity per hour and the growth rate of income. Now, principle 9 means prices rise when the government prints too much money. What do we mean by this principle? For instance, in Germany, in January 1921, a daily newspaper cost 0.3 marks. Less than 2 years later, in November 1922, the same newspaper cost, wait for it, 70 million marks. All other prices in the economy rose by similar amounts. This episode is one of history's most spectacular example of inflation. This is inflation. An increase in the overall, which means an increase in the overall level of prices in the economy. What causes inflation? We might question. In almost all causes of large or present inflation, the culprit turns out to be the same: growth in the quantity of money. When a government creates large quantities of the nation's money, the value okay, the value, another good and important term, of the money falls in Germany in the early 1920s when prices were on average tripling every month. The quantity of money was also tripling every month. Although less dramatic, the economic history of the United States points to a similar conclusion. The high inflation of the 1970s was associated with rapid growth in the quantity of money, and the low inflation of the 1990s was associated with slow growth in the quantity of money. Now, the last principle we're gonna encounter in this course is society faces a short-run trade-off between inflation and unemployment. Another very important economic phenomenon is unemployment. What do we mean by unemployment? Okay, we're gonna see that. If inflation is easy to explain, why do policymakers sometimes have trouble reading the economy of it? One reason is that reducing inflation is often thought to cause a temporary rise in unemployment. The curve that illustrates this trade-off between inflation and employment is a very important and well-known theory made by Philip, which is called the Phillips curve, after the economists who first examined this relationship. The Phillips curve remains a controversial topic among economists till today. But most economists today accept the idea that there is a short-run trade-off between inflation and unemployment. This simply means that over a period of a year or two, many economic policies push inflation and unemployment in opposite directions. Policymakers face this trade-off regardless of whether inflation and unemployment both start out at high levels, as they were in the early of 1980s in America, at a low level as they were in the late of 1990s in also America, or someplace in the between.